Oh, I clipped in by mistake.
Ooh, 38. Mountain biking is excellent.
Ibis were in their heyday with the original 26-inch Mojo, as well as the subsequent HD, and despite having a consistent presence in the EWS, they might not have been the first brand you'd think of when considering a new racy enduro bike. But could that be about to change? The HD6 takes its place as Ibis's longest travel bike, with 160mm of travel at the rear delivered via a DW Link suspension layout, all paired to a massive 180mm fork.
When it first launched, the biggest talking point about the HD6 was its straight top tube. I think they did a good job making it look a little bit less swoopy and a little bit more modern than some of their previous offerings.
Yeah, I think it's hard to disagree with the looks of the Ibis. Now they've gone with those straighter tubes, more modern geometry numbers.
Yeah, exactly. There's also 5 sizes, which should make it a little bit easier for riders to find the bike that fits them appropriately.
So it's a mixed wheel platform with big travel, and it does without that divisive swooping top tube. The HD6 represents some of the best of modern enduro. Plus, we all considered it to be one of the better looking bikes on test, which is a markedly different assessment to how we felt about previous generations.
The HD6 is one of the lightest bikes we have on test, and while weight isn't everything, it certainly helps, especially considering that compared to the heaviest bike, the Ibis is 7 pounds lighter.
Yeah, that's impressive. But there was one attribute that we did notice that stood out. The 76.5 degree seat tube angle is a little slacker than most, although it did work with some of the dimensions around the rest of the bike.
As far as the suspension performance goes when climbing, it's very impressive. This is a bike with 165mm of rear travel, but it's got that nice supple feel off the top without being too wallowy. If you stand up and really sprint on it, it still remains fairly supportive. So it kind of has a good blend of what you'd consider maybe trail bike attributes, but with more travel that you would hope to see on an enduro race bike.
Simply put, this bike is light, fast and effective, and is a long travel bike for those that want the efficiency and tautness of something with a little less travel. But what's it like on the descents? And did this welterweight have us saying, I biss off more than I could chew, I biss, I bit, I'll get my coat. Roll the footage.
Now on paper, the HD6 is one of the most mild-mannered looking bikes that we had in our test. We kept calling it the palate cleanser because it was one of the easiest bikes to just hop on and ride. It felt normal. There were no outliers or extreme numbers.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those ones you can kind of hop on and not have to adjust your riding style. One thing that I did notice though, we mentioned before, the bike's designed around a 180mm fork in a really steep terrain. As you're going through that travel, it can make the bike feel a little bit steeper, and that's partially because Ibis decided to use a very short head tube. They didn't want the stack height of the bike to be too high, which kind of makes sense, but I do wish they pushed it maybe a little bit further.
So we talked about the geometry being more modern and up to scratch, and it is a very easy bike to ride, and in the right hands, it can be pushed harder. So it's not a bike that's too stiff or too wallowy or anything. It's gonna be a good race bike, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It strikes a nice middle ground. It's worth mentioning though that the chainstay length remains the same throughout all the sizes. I think that does help with the size large we're on. Those mixed wheels, relatively short back end, kind of gives it that nice playful feel. But as you go up to the larger sizes, you may encounter a little bit of an imbalance.
The bike is definitely like alive and quick in the corners, easy to pick up and get over stuff.
But some riders that are looking for that kind of extra long, extra slack, super burly thing, they're not going to find it here. But I think that the well-roundedness is kind of almost a pro and a con.
Gentle, considerate, and not brutish by its nature, all while being very fast. But that's enough about Kazuma himself, and let's get back to the Ibis. Many brands say that they have race teams to develop their bike, and after nearly a decade on the circuit, maybe this new HD6 is so good that the race team felt, hey, they've done their job, and that's why they folded the team. Either way, the Ibis really is a refreshing take, without the compromise or blind spots in design that we've seen in some of the other bikes. That said, it could definitely be more aggressive, and that trail bikey feel is still something you'll be aware of at times on the descents as well as the climbs.
Ibis did a good job sorting out the little details on the HD6's frame. It's got internal cable routing that doesn't rattle. It's good chain slap protection. There's room for a water bottle. It's a little bit harder to reach since it's kind of tucked a little bit lower in the frame, but it's there.
So one thing that does come with the Ibis is those round carbon tubes, and that doesn't leave any space for an internal storage box. And you know, that's sort of the more trendy thing to do with these style bikes. And it's not a total deal breaker. There are mounts under the top tube for a pump or a tube, whatever.
Another nice frame feature is the fact that the HD6 is coil shock compatible, and Ibis stressed that it's compatible with all coil shocks. So there's no limitations to kind of revise the shock mount, so it shouldn't put any undue stress on a coil shock. We're totally happy with the way they perform with the air shock, but it's always nice to have more options.
A great bike then, even if, like so many of the other bikes on the test, it comes with a dropper that is simply too short. But that's probably more of a SRAM problem than an Ibis one specifically. However, for over $11,000, yes, you heard me right, $11,000, it's more than slightly disheartening that you'd want to buy a new dropper immediately. So who's this bike for?
Now, this isn't the wildest bike in terms of geometry, but I think an expert level enduro racer could probably take this bike to some, high speeds, ride it flat out.
Yeah, definitely has that race bike feel, but for the rider that really wants that kind of a bike that's been pushed to the limits with a super slack height angle, it's super long, everything, it doesn't have that, which isn't the end of the world, but I do think there's room for a few little tweaks. Like I mentioned, you can put in an angle set, slacken out just that little bit to kind of improve its capabilities in the really steep stuff, but overall, definitely can be raced right out of the box.
The bike then for the person who wants the security of extra travel without some of the inherent drawbacks. What are the bike's pros and cons?
I'd say the HD6's greatest strength is its versatility. It's a bike we've mentioned a few times before. It almost feels like a longer travel trail bike, but you can definitely race it. It has big fork up front, plenty of travel, but you're not going to feel like you brought the wrong bike if you go somewhere with a little bit mellower terrain.
Yeah, and that being said about the big travel fork, there is a little bit of an imbalance. You have a 180 fork, that's a lot of sag up front. That's only matched with 165 out back. That in combination with the 435mm chainstays across all sizes, can leave some imbalance depending on who the rider is and how they set up their bike.
The Ibis then seems like a genuine step forward from its previous version, while still incorporating many of the elements that people have come to know and love about the brand. Light, carbon, and the ever-present DW link will surely prove a hit with Ibis diehards, and the sophisticated clean looks and do-it-all nature will undoubtedly win over the hearts and minds of those who may well have viewed Ibis as something that wasn't quite for them. Either way, the HD6 is a really solid bike, offering a great platform, suspension feel, and an excellent blend of stiffness and comfort, all while being arguably the most well-rounded bike on test. That said, it isn't for people who want something completely radical, in terms of geometry at least.